Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me? I was telling the audio people that I'm little, but I'm loud. So, how's everyone feeling? I'm allowed to ask. I'm a psychologist, I usually say. Yeah, good. Excited, inspired. There are at least 2 of the 10 positive emotions that we now know through the major work of Professor Barbara Fredrickson. But first of all, I wanted to thank CoachHub and thanks Yanis for inviting me to be part of this. And I'm very honoured to be on the Scientific Advisory Board and working with experts who really are, a lot of them, leading in academia on the research and practice of coaching and coaching psychology. So that was one of the absolute yeses for me when I was approached to be part of this. This has been something that I have been passionate about, and I'm really showing my age here now, for about 20 years. So I was doing a doctorate in clinical psychology back in 2001, and by a series of fortunate events, Jung would have called it synchronicity, I managed to secure a supervisor for my master's, which became a doctorate, who was Professor Lindsay Oates. Some of you, or any of you that are based here in Melbourne, are aware that the University of Melbourne have a Centre for Wellbeing Science, and Lindsay leads that centre now. And so through Lindsay's support, I was able to do a well-first study on evidence-based coaching as a mental health prevention intervention, which back in 2001 was unheard of. Particularly as clinical psychologists, we're meant to treat people. We're not meant to really be spending too much of our time in the mental health promotion space. So there I am, everyone else is studying depression and schizophrenia, and I'm doing life coaching study. And yes, we were able to show, my study was able to show with my colleagues that not only did evidence-based coaching help people achieve their goals, it helped improve both their psychological and their subjective wellbeing, and it also led to decreases in depression, anxiety and stress. So I've been talking about this for about 20 years now, and for a large part of the early years, people used to look at me like I was Pollyanna out the front and sort of roll their eyes. Yeah, right, that won't ever happen here. And so this is a dream come true for me to be here and to be part of this, because from the very beginning, given my clinical background, even though I moved very quickly into executive and leadership coaching, my heart was always in coaching for everybody, for the democratisation of coaching. And I know we're not fully there yet. We're still, I guess, emerging and evolving in this space, but that is my hope, that into the future, that everyone has access to coaching in some form or another. So I am here to talk to you today about positive psychology coaching for success, and you can see it's a triple whammy, I call it, because the research tells us that not only, as I said before, it has a positive impact to our mental health, our psychological well-being, and our performance or our capability. So often my experience has been in working with organisations, we've been brought in from a mental health perspective, or we've been brought in from a wellness perspective, or we've been brought in from a leadership capability perspective. What we're arguing is that positive psychology, combined with a powerful approach like coaching, addresses all 3 of those. And in fact, it's not an either or anymore. And as you'll hear today, it's actually essential that we focus both on performance and well-being. But before we do, who has heard of positive psychology coaching before? Some of you might have heard of positive psychology, but maybe not positive psychology coaching. Who has no idea what I'm talking about at this point in time? No, most people do. Very well informed. Fantastic. But before I start talking about positive psychology coaching, the session is called For Success, so I want you to just take a moment, and this is in the spirit of building what we call high-quality connections, which is research by Professor Jane Dutton out of the Ross School of Business, University of Michigan, and she talks about these very brief interactions that we have that leave us feeling energised, and in fact that's what a coaching relationship does. It builds high-quality connections and builds energy. So just take a moment, turn to the person next to you. Great opportunity to talk to someone you've never met before. What does success mean to you personally, but also what might it mean to your organisation? Because there might not be alignment there, I'm not sure. Just a couple of minutes. Okay. Everyone finished, hopefully? We do have a mic, but I'm just wondering if anyone wanted to feed back. Maybe throw a few words at me. What came up when you were talking about success? What came up? What were the words? You going to say? Oh, balance, yeah, which is always a tricky one, isn't it? And I know we've moved for a long time now from work-life balance to work-life integration. But yeah, that's always a challenging one. Were you going to say something? Fulfillment. That's a great one, isn't it? There's a great Simon Sinek video on fulfillment. I don't know if anyone's seen that. Very inspiring as well. Really challenging what that means for young people today. Anyone else have anything? Purposeful? Yep. Connections, yep. And what about the discussion in terms of the organisations that you work for? Do you think they're now moving or have already moved to the recognition that it's not just... Because I know when I first started coaching in some fairly large organisations back in 2004, it was all about performance, KPIs. Don't mention the word well-being. Don't even say you're a psychologist because people will think there's something wrong with you. But I've really seen it change over this time frame. Do you think it's changing? Yep. Fantastic. All right, well, that's my hope. But it is this challenge, isn't it, which did pre-exist COVID, but I think it's been highlighted by COVID, which is the financials versus humanity, or people versus profit, and trying to find that, that balance. Any thoughts or comments on that? To hear if anyone has some insightful wisdom to share with us. I think we're all learning, aren't we, about how best to do this. You, Dan?
I think theoretically a lot of us know the balance needs to tip.
Yes.
But on a day-to-day basis, a lot of companies haven't learned or don't know yet how to
do
really
that.
do that.
Yeah, so Yudan said theoretically she believes companies understand that and leaders, but on a day-to-day basis, not quite sure how to translate that. And I think we know from the research that when you're in fight, flight or freeze, which is what stress and COVID has occurred for us, our thinking shuts down. We can't actually see opportunities or options or solutions. So on that day-to-day basis, it might be very hard to keep the ideal in the forefront of our mind, really, which is why we need more positivity to actually broaden our perspectives, to be more creative and to be more solution-focused. But interestingly enough, there's been a bit of a backlash, as you can imagine. We've had a couple of emails saying, I can't believe you're promoting happiness when, the world is in the state that it is. And I actually took the time to respond to this person because I wanted them to understand that there's a really significant research base to show that if we can balance out, this is not saying we don't acknowledge or validate or sit with these uncomfortable emotions. In fact, that's the most evidence-based approach now to managing those emotions rather than getting rid of them. But there's a real opportunity to boost these positive emotions, which, as I said, allow us to be more creative, more solution-focused. Fiona, you were going to say something.
I was just going to say, I think it's rather the versus is the and.
I love it.
So
yeah.
Financials and humanity, people and profit, because sometimes I think we consider that these are in conflict, and they don't have to be in conflict.
Yes.
One leads to the other at times.
Yes, absolutely. Did everyone hear that? Fiona was saying that she doesn't believe that they need to be in conflict and it should be an and rather than a versus. So thank you. Thank you. I will keep going because I have got a few slides, but we do have a mic now. Thank you. Thanks, Dave. So I was really fortunate to publish a textbook. It's practitioner academics. So we thought really carefully about who we asked to write chapters for this textbook, and we ensured that they had an academic base or were academics but paired with a practitioner. So as you know, coaching is very much a science, but it's an art as well. So this is directly from our book with my colleagues Wendy Ann Smith and Alona Bonnywell, that for organisations and their leadership to lead and not just survive but thrive, which we've heard a lot, there's a need to refocus organisational thinking to place the needs of workplace humanity, wellbeing and development at the heart of all organisational decision-making and processes, both as a good and noble act, but also in recognition that human capital is a key lever to a thriving organisation. I think, you all here already know that. I've had also the privilege of working with Accenture Australia and New Zealand this is our 5th year running a leadership development and coaching program. And when I first started there, I was fortunate to meet the incredible Bob Easton, who's just retired from Accenture actually, and he was the country manager and became the chairman, and he's just retired. But when I asked Bob, what do you want from this coaching program? He said to me, just to help people be better human beings. Now, in my whole career, I had never heard a senior leader say something like that. But fortunately now I'm meeting more dream clients that they're exactly the words that are coming out of their mouths. So I think for me, very exciting time to be in this space. So the stats, look, I'm not going to read them out because everybody knows, the state of mental health or mental illness more so. I always find that interesting. When I was studying at the University of Wollongong, we had an Institute for Mental Health. Wasn't really, it was studying mental illness. And that's important, but this again highlights the need for us to be much more proactive rather than reactive. And that's been the mission that I've been on for the last 20 years now. We know that COVID also led to a significant, I think 20% increase in some of these statistics. Kids Helpline, and I also think Lifeline, had the most amount of calls ever during that period of time. I also think that people are much more open, and I think we're not quite like New York where people brag about their therapist yet. I can't wait for the day that it's like that. But things are changing now. So when it comes to workplace mental health and wellbeing, this is an area clearly I've been playing in or working in for quite a while. But more recently, I've become aware of some work by a professor down here at Deakin University, Professor Anthony LaMontagne. I don't know if anyone's familiar with his work. And it's his model, which I'm going to show you in a moment, has really allowed me to get very clear about where we sit, our sweet spot, but also the other considerations that we need to be recommending or educating our clients around, which in many ways we were already doing, but this has really given me a very clear framework. Anyone seen this model or read that paper by Anthony LaMontagne? It's called An Integrated Approach to Workplace Mental Health. And it was published in 2014. He has published a couple of newer ones, but this is the original paper where he outlined what he believes is the most efficient and effective approach to workplace mental health. Prevent harm. So this is going to be, and I'm sure many of you are already aware of this, psychological health and safety in the workplace. I think, tell me if I'm wrong, but there's already a code of practice here in Victoria. There's legislation. There's always been legislation around OC health and safety, but this is specific legislation around psychological health and safety, because the reality is the majority of claims now are psychological in nature. So there is an increasing focus on organisations to assess those psychosocial hazards and to prevent harm as much as they can, as much as is practicable, I think is the legal term. I'm going to jump to the other side, manage illness. So that's when perhaps people are already struggling in the workplace, and that's primarily your EAP services or making people aware of what other referral pathways there are. But I just loved it when I saw the third one, which was promote the positive. So, in fact, one of my colleagues who's an org psych, he's now changed that language around promoting flourishing. Because as most of you know, in the field of positive psychology, we use the F word a lot, flourishing. So promoting the positive will promote flourishing. So that's our sweet spot in my business. And I would also argue that CoachHub in many ways is also in that space. But an important consideration to keep in mind, which the coaches at CoachHub are all aware of, is that because of the prevalence of mental illness, we need to be equipped to be able to identify and refer on if that's appropriate. And that's something that I've, particularly as a clinician, have been very well aware of. And I recall in the early days, I made I had my PA actually make a few calls to some of the life coach training institutes that were around. There was quite a few of them. And to ask them, did they have any content in their training about mental illness, identification and referral? And the overwhelming response at that time was no, because we don't work with people that have mental illness. well, that's hysterical based on the statistics. I am aware that that is changing now, which is great, but as you know, coaching is an unregulated industry, so it's really important that we do keep that in mind. So mental health promotion, and this has been around for a long time, this concept that there's treatment for when people are unwell, there's targeted prevention for groups of people that perhaps are going through significant stress or require that sort of targeted preventative approach, but then there's a broader mental health promotion which is meant to be for everybody. It's like population health approaches. And this paper that I found was actually looking at it from a research perspective, saying there's so much research on the benefits of, treatment, but also prevention, but there's not a lot yet on mental health promotion. And in fact, as they concluded, the potentials of fostering and promoting mental wellbeing have largely remained unexploited, resulting in a marginal population level impact. Now, the coaches might be working with people on any goal, and that's the beauty of coaching, is that you can come with any goal, and the research, including my own, shows that well-being is an outcome of the daily striving towards personally meaningful goals. Whereas if you're familiar with some of the research on positive psychology interventions, if you engage people in a positive psych intervention, regardless of whether that's one discrete intervention or multi-component intervention, the goal of a positive psych intervention is to increase well-being. So you've got a goal and you move towards that through doing a series of activities or interventions. Whereas you can see coaching, the goal can be whatever it is, and it's the progression, as I said, particularly when there's values alignment between your goals, values alignment to your goals, and as you're progressing towards those goals, that's where the wellbeing emanates from. But of course, and this is something I've published and presented on quite a lot, the ideal is the combination of both of these fields. So what is flourishing? What is flourishing? So there are different definitions, discussions. It's an ongoing, debate in some ways within the psychological literature. This is a graph that I've used for a long time by my colleague, Professor Felicia Huppert from Cambridge University Institute of Wellbeing. We all know the stats around the common mental disorders like depression and anxiety in particular. Languishing. Now, I've been using that word for 20 years as well. You, Dan, will know that from university. But last year or the year before, Professor Adam Grant, who is very well known, Wharton Business School, published a paper on languishing, and now everybody knows what it is, which is great. So I'm really thankful for Adam for doing that. So languishing in a very brief nutshell is low levels of mental health and low levels of well-being, potentially subclinical depression. So it's really important that we try and move people up this spectrum rather than them potentially spiralling down. Good news is most of us are moderately mentally healthy. Woohoo! It's great, isn't it? That's woohoo! It's feeling the energy here. Less than 20% of, and these are US-based. There was an Australian one done in South Australia with an adolescent population. Less than 20% of people are flourishing. Again, very simply, flourishing is high levels of mental health and well-being and low levels of mental illness. But the other way to look at it, this is called the Wellbeing Engagement Framework, which was created by my mentor, Professor Anthony Grant, who we very sadly lost only a couple of years ago from Sydney University. He is known as the founding father of coaching psychology, which started at Sydney Uni and has gone global, which is incredible, and been very fortunate to be part of that. So we look at not just well-being on one spectrum, but we look at performance or engagement. There's a few different variations of this graph. So with that low well-being, low performance, distress, dysfunctional, potentially clinical treatment. But what we see in the workplace, also in schools, which we do some work in positive education, high levels of performance, high levels of engagement to the detriment of people's well-being. So that's perfect group for coaching. Also, it's a tricky one, acquiescent, Tony called it, otherwise known as the plodders or the coasters. So high levels of well-being, but not that engaged, not truly flourishing, which is the combination of high well-being and high engagement. nothing really wrong with a little bit of plotting now and then, particularly if you've been working hard on some goals for a period. Take a breath. But ideally, we are looking for this sense of engagement, using your strengths, which I know Fiona's really passionate about, high levels of positive emotions, engagement, high quality connections, meaning and accomplishment. Benefits to business. So I know Yana spoke a little bit about some of the ROI. Interestingly, up until this paper, which was in 2019, there was a little bit of, discussion around whether the results on this happy, productive worker hypothesis, how supportive was the research, and there was some debate about whether it was really rigorous enough, the research, and if it really was giving us the business case that we needed. But this paper, which we've quoted in our book recently, actually took all of the Gallup research, the Gallup database, which I believe up until now, Gallup have very tightly held their research. They haven't made it offered it for a peer review, but this paper reviewed 339 independent research studies. It's a very large meta-analysis, and concluded that ultimately higher wellbeing at work is positively correlated with more business unit level profitability. But let's not forget, it's also a good and noble act. It's not just about profitability. It's The Manager, another wonderful Gallup book. Anyone have that book? It came out only a year or two ago. And interestingly, I'm not sure if you're aware, for many years Gallup have been known for their engagement survey, but then they started to measure wellbeing separately. I'm not sure if you're aware of that. And they referred to the wellbeing engagement paradox of 2020. I don't know if anyone saw that. And what they found was, historically, when wellbeing and engagement were highly correlated, and if one went up, the other one would go up. But through 2020, when COVID hit, what they found was engagement levels went through the roof and wellbeing dropped significantly. And that speaks to I know I can go backwards, but I won't, to that graph that I was saying before. If you're really, really highly engaged, there can be where it sort of becomes burnout, I guess, then there's a potential detriment to wellbeing. But we do know that when managers are thriving, they're 2 times more likely to be engaged. This is some work by Professor Kim Cameron. Anyone familiar with Kim's work? Ross School of Business, University of Michigan. He's been out here to Australia before, incredible. If you want to Google it, great Google talk that he gave outlining his research as well. The positive energy of the unit leader and the impact on the team members, but also right through to their families. Now, positive energy, I just want to briefly clarify what that is. It's not about being extroverted and bubbly, because often when we think about positive energy, people are thinking the bubbly extroverts. They actually factored out extroversion. So you can be an introvert and still be a positive energizer. It's how you make people feel. Do you actually give someone your full attention when you're in connection with them, rather than being on your phone or tapping away at the laptop? Do you validate someone's concern, even if you don't potentially agree with it, before offering your different, perhaps, perspective on it? Are you supportive and encouraging so that when people walk away from those interactions, they feel energised rather than deflated, like the energy vampires we've heard about for a long time? So clearly some people are naturals at that, but the good news is we can learn. I wouldn't be here. I wouldn't be a psychologist if I didn't believe people can't grow and develop and change. And of course, the research from neuroscience has supported that in recent years. So what we're talking about here is the emotional and social contagion effect. And I think all of us intuitively know that, don't we, that emotions are contagious. That was some great work. I'm trying to think of the name of the book. Some of you will be able to tell me. That was published, Nicholas Christakis' work. I can't think of it, it'll come to me. But then also, I'm going to go back. I'm sorry. We also know that the impact of coaching is contagious, and I've got another slide about that. But before I go on, just going to check time in a minute. I'm fine. What's your strategy? So what are you doing already in your organisations? Is it positive psychology interventions? Are you drawing on the science of positive psych? Do you have a coaching culture, or are you very much in the early stages of developing a coaching culture? have you possibly engaged, as I said, both of these fields together into positive psychology coaching? I'll just give you a few minutes to have a chat to perhaps someone else. Everyone, just wrapping up your conversation. Sorry to interrupt, but great, I can feel the energy. And I'm sure most of you are aware, but just to clarify, positive psychology, the definition I prefer to use is the science of optimal human functioning. Often it is referred to as the science of well-being, and I think that's great, but I love the broader conceptualisation, which speaks back to some of the humanistic psychology that occurred with Carl Rogers, Abraham Maslow, that was talking about self-actualisation in the 50s and 60s. For me, coaching really has the potential to help us be our best selves, or a greater you. Who was doing some form of pos-psych in their organisation? Fiona, definitely. Some people, yes, no. Looking to the science. And I think my argument is, in organisations, you can't imagine using, whether it's technology or whatever the area of business is, can you imagine not using the most cutting edge technology or research around it? So when it comes to well-being and performance, I would argue this is the research field to be looking to. Any comments? I'm mindful of time, but unless there's a burning comment, we will hopefully have a few minutes at the end for questions. So positive psych coaching. I published, co-authored 2 textbooks on this. They are user-friendly for practitioners as well. They're not, as I said, too academically focused. In the first text with Professor Stephen Palmer, we defined it as evidence-based coaching informed by the theories and research of positive psychology for the enhancement of resilience, achievement and well-being. We call it RAW in our business. There's a little bit of a blur there. Another way to think about it is it's the intelligent and conscientious use of best current knowledge, and I've inserted here, from the field of positive psychology, because there are other fields that coaches draw on, like neuroscience in particular, integrated with practitioner expertise in making decisions about how to deliver coaching to support optimal human functioning. So as coaches, coaching, particularly coaching psychology, which is my field, has always been about performance and well-being. And so my argument to the coaches many years ago is, if you're going to be coaching to well-being, you need to know what the science says. And so that's where we're at now, which is really exciting to see. It's also known as third-generation coaching. Professor Reinhard Stelter from Denmark, he's actually German. I don't know if you've met him yet, Janis. He's a fantastic academic and practitioner. He talks about coaching moving, and this was back in 2014, moving more to values and meaning focused, which is wonderful. And then Tony Grant talking about moving beyond just performance, as I said before, to performance and well-being. Oh, sorry about that. The slides, the fonts have not quite aligned. So in terms of organisations, we can use positive psychology coaching for personal transformation. And this is a great model by my colleague, Professor Aaron Jardin at the University of Melbourne. Very simple, me, we and us. So we can use it at the individual level. We can use it at the leader and team level, which is the we, and we can look at being more strategic about, as I said before, building a coaching culture at the organisational level. But not forgetting, though, that we can create this systemic transformation and organisational flourishing through these, the emotional and social contagion, the ripple effect. There it is. So if you are interested, I'm fairly sure this paper is open access. Yes, it is. This is by my colleague, Dr. Sean O'Connor, who now is the Director of the Coaching Psychology Unit at the University of Sydney. And his PhD research actually tracked, using social network analysis, the impact of somebody receiving coaching on the people around them. There's some really interesting findings there, which I won't have time to go into. I'd love to, but I'll leave it to this today and keep you interested in wanting to learn more. The ROI, well, some of you may be familiar with the PwC report. It was 2014 that showed for every dollar invested, there's a $2.30 return. There were about 7 interventions identified in that paper. Coaching was one of them, and resilience training was another one. And I also just want to quote briefly my very close colleague Michelle McQuaid, which I know some of you, I know Fiona knows you, some of you will have worked with Michelle, has done, I think, at least 3 workplace reports in the last few years. And if you are interested, I was interviewed for her podcast talking specifically about wellbeing coaching. And so what this study found was these are wellbeing workplace support, and you can see EAP is the greatest level of support. Nothing, followed by nothing, 19.4, or actually what do they call it? The 3 Fs, flu, fitness and fruit bowls, the 3 Fs, and then nothing. And you can see wellbeing coaching is only 8.4% there. And in Michelle's study, they found that that's actually what people were wanting, but organisations weren't providing it. And then finally, you can look at, she looked at people in terms of consistently thriving, not feeling bad, just getting by, living well despite struggles and really struggling. And I'll just bring your attention to wellbeing coaching is the blue. So you can see the people that were consistently thriving had access to and were using wellbeing coaching much more than people that were really struggling. So I know we're very much at the early stages of this, that it's primarily still being used for leaders and managers, which is great because often it's really only been that senior exec level that's had access to coaching. It's wonderful that we're getting it to leaders and managers. My hope and dream is that it is open for access for all staff into the future, maybe not all at the same time, but that more people do have access to coaching and we truly do bring the democratisation of coaching to life. I do have, I think, 5 minutes for a few questions, but thank you so much for listening to me today. Any questions? Comments, thoughts, reflections, ahas? Oh, everyone's quiet.
Suzy,
You, Dan.
what would you say for the companies who really want to amplify this direction, but maybe internally there's still a lot of people, especially decision makers, not sure. So for instance, the head of HR, the head of learning, head of OD is very passionate.
Yes.
But the rest of functional leads are not sure. What would be one thing you would advise them?
Yeah, I think like any initiative, you want to have your business case sorted and look to the science. I know it's not easy though. I've been doing a series of CEO Institute presentations over the last 2 years. And some people, you can sort of see the full bell curve spectrum. So some leaders are like, yeah, every morning, one of these MDs said every morning I either text, email or phone 5 people in my organisation to just check in to see how they are, to give them some feedback, express gratitude. And one of the other fellows said, oh God, people would think I'd gone nuts if I did something like that, and he said, that just wouldn't be me. And I said, no, well, that's often the case when we're first trialling new ways of being. I said, it might feel a little bit fake, it might feel a little bit ingenuous, but as you start to get feedback from people, you'll start to find that it becomes part of who you are and it'll reinforce that type of behaviour. But I also had another person say to me, Suzy, the pendulum swung too far, we're pandering to people, is what one of these CEOs said to me. And I said, that's an interesting take on it. What do other people think? And interestingly, we had a really lively debate, whereas somebody else said, no, we absolutely have a duty of care. Another person said, people talk. And this same fellow said, not everybody has mental illness. And somebody else said to him, yes, but just because you don't have it now might not mean you don't have it in future. It's a really interesting debate, but I know for some of you, you've got your work cut out for you. If there's anything I can do at any time or CoachHub can do in terms of providing that evidence base, I think that's a really great way to start. Yeah, I hope that's helpful, you, Dan. Okay, well, thank you so much, everybody. I hope you enjoy the morning.